hello.
Hey, Deborah. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, Jim. We're here with Jim Burgess, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his experiences in this area and growing up in Mount Holly Springs. But before we get into your childhood, maybe you can share a little bit about how you had worked in this area, particularly your role as an educator in various schools in this area.
Sure. Well, I'm a retired educator. I was a teacher for 9 years and elementary principal for 24 years. Most of my teaching experience was in other districts, although some was in the Carlisle School District. And all of my administrative experiences was in the Carlisle School District. And I'm a product of the Carlisle School District, so it was always an honor and a privilege to give back to the school community that made so many opportunities for me.
We'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but you were at Letort and Bel Air, I know?
Letort, Crestview, and Bel Air elementary schools.
Principals at all of those schools. And of course, all very different community-oriented schools.
Absolutely, yeah.
There were lots of, I'm sure you have other stories to tell us about those schools, but we'll go on and talk a little bit about Mount Holly first.
Sounds good.
You grew up in Mount Holly Springs, didn't you?
I did. My parents moved there before I was born, and we lived on Hill Street, top of the hill, and went to elementary school for, that back then it was through 6th grade at Mount Holly Elementary School. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell us about your parents a little bit. What did they do? What drew them to Mount Holly?
Sure. Well, my dad originally was from Pittsburgh, and my mom was from Mount Union. They both went to Shippensburg State College at that point. And my dad landed a job as a teacher in Mechanicsburg School District, and ended up buying a house in Mount Holly because that's where they could afford a house. They lived in Carlisle for a while in an apartment, and had my brother, and then I came along, and they needed a bigger place to live. So Mount Holly was affordable, and that's where they ended up.
Oh, that's a neat story. So this would have been in the late 50s, early 60s?
Correct. I was born in 58. My brother was in 55. So they moved there probably 54, something like that. So
tell us a little bit about what Holly was like during that time period.
Well, Mount Holly was a wonderful place to grow up. It's defines pretty much who I am, and living in Mount Holly, it's a small town. I can remember when I was old enough to ride a bike that I would get on my bike in the morning, and I would just do my tour around town to visit various friends and go different places. Friends lived right down the street from us, spent a lot of time there. A lot of sports. Didn't have the technology and the smartphones and all the devices back then, so entertainment was going outside. And I'm glad I lived in that era because that was certainly worthwhile.
You talked about sports. Now, at that time, I may have my decades wrong, but Mount Holly Springs was always a big baseball town.
There was Little League in Mount Holly. I went through the Little League before Sid Brame. Obviously, I'm older than he is, but yeah, Little League was always a big deal there, and I played Little League and Pony League, and that was a wonderful experience. We always would do pickup games of football and basketball and wiffle ball and kickball. There'd always be a game going. And the neighborhood where I lived was full of kids, so it just was ideal.
Tell us about going to Mount Holly Springs Elementary School.
Well, interestingly enough, I was one of the first classes that went there for all 6 grades. My brother started his schooling at the Chestnut Street School for kindergarten, and then he's 3 years older than me, so...
Now, tell me a little bit. Now, is that the building that has the firehouse?
It is. Yeah, that was a school. That was the Mount Holly School. Used to be the high school until they consolidated, and then it was an elementary school. And then in the 50s with Mr. Swartz, David Swartz, he worked on consolidating, and like everybody else in the state at that point, and that's when the elementary school was built, probably 56 or so.
Yeah, it looks like a baby boomer school.
It is, absolutely it is, yeah. It's one of the I've never seen a longer hallway than in that school. And that's certainly a memory of going through there. Of course, they added on since I was there. So.
Did you run down that hallway
with
a boy?
Of course.
Okay. I see little boys doing that now, so I can picture you doing that.
In fact, I was at the school just recently during the school year, and we used to, one of the jobs was to take the trash to the chute, the put it down the chute, and when they burned it, that's how they got rid of the trash.
Oh, yes.
And that chute's still there, so it's locked up now. But
And no one
I remember
burns
that
trash
chute.
anymore.
No, they don't do that anymore.
Yes.
But that was a job back then
Uh-huh.
for the classroom.
What else? And so you had blackboards, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely.
chalk?
Chalk and blackboards. There were no computers.
Mm-hmm.
None of that existed. Dick and Jane books were the
Yes.
reading basils. Just a very basic elementary school, math, arithmetic, and reading, and English were the approach, and that was the basic curriculum back then.
And you sat behind desks,
Uh-huh.
and you raised your hands.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't a lot of desk arrangements that weren't rows back then.
Mm-hmm.
That was very typical.
Did you sit in alphabetical order in your rows? Or do you
I don't remember that. I think that may have been the way it started, but the teacher pretty quickly realized who couldn't sit next to one another.
Okay. So did you go through school with the same group of kids?
Pretty much, yeah, pretty much. In fact, I just was at Crumbs recently down in Mount Holly, and the head basketball coach at Boiling Springs, Pat Dieter, and I were classmates, and we were talking about Mount Holly. So, yes, there's still folks around that I went to school with.
And people have really fond memories of
Oh,
those days.
absolutely. Everybody has fond memories about living in Mount Holly.
So then you went to Carlisle High School, right?
I did. Went to the Lamberton Junior High School. That was used to be the high school.
Uh-huh.
And when I was going through was the junior high school. You go from a little one hallway school to a dungeon-like building that had 3 floors, and it was a maze of hallways, so it was pretty intimidating.
Let's talk a little bit more about that experience. What was it like the first day you went into the larger school?
It was stressful, intimidating. I certainly had an advantage. My mother was a teacher, and she taught at that building, so she was an English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Her room was on the 3rd floor, so I always knew that there was a
net.
lifeline there if I needed it. And but it was very intimidating, if I recall. And lots of times the kids from Mount Holly, they were the Holly Hicks. That's what we were called, the Holly Hicks. Because we were out of town, we weren't in town, and back then Mount Holly was more of an agricultural rural area compared to the big city in Carlisle. So that was always somewhat of a challenge.
So I imagine when you were at Mount Holly, you had ridden your bike to school or walked to school?
Oh yeah, we walked and rode bike.
Mm-hmm.
That was a safety patrol.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's how it was in Mount Holly. And of course, to go to junior high, that was a bus ride.
Yeah.
And
So that was
all
different right then.
It was all different. Different kids. The building was very intimidating. Changing classes with having different teachers was all new. So, yeah.
When you were on the bus, did you sing songs? And
Well, by then we were 7th grade, so
Okay.
that probably was not something we did.
you were too cool by then to do
Oh
that.
yeah, that was we were older then. We weren't singing.
But when you went to Carlisle, did you play basketball in high school?
I did for a while.
That was the day of big basketball teams in Carlisle.
No, this was before then.
Oh, before then,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I graduated in 1976, so the 80s were when the Carlisle teams
Okay.
were state champions. But I did some. I mean, I didn't play all the. I mean, I didn't do a 9 through 12 basketball experience. I played some. A lot of pickup games that I did, and I was involved in different activities. I remember in high school I used to do the announcements, the morning announcements, and different clubs. And in fact, when I graduated, I was one of the commencement speakers. I was selected to be one of the commencement
really?
speakers. And it wasn't based on class rank then. It was, I'm not sure how that worked. Did people nominated you or something along those lines?
So what did you talk about in your commencement address?
Albert Camus, existentialism. I was into philosophy back then, so I'm not sure what exactly I had to say that was important, but I thought it was important when I was saying it.
Of course.
But discovering oneself was the
Right.
theme.
That's a good theme, that a commencement address.
Yeah, pretty abstract.
Right. So let's go back, less abstract, and back to your grade school days in Mount
Okay.
Holly. Were there special teachers why did you go into education? Were there special teachers that encouraged you?
Well, my
that
parents
way?
were both teachers, so that certainly was an influence. But probably I decided when I was in 6th grade that I wanted to be a teacher. And here's the deal. Here was my 6th grade experience. There was no room in the main part of the building when I was in 6th grade. The building was overcrowded.
This is Lamberton.
No, this is
Still at Holly?
Mount Holly.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
6th grade was in the elementary school back then.
Okay.
And so the school district rented a band hall back then, which was right down the street. It's now apartments.
Okay.
So the 6th grade, and there was only one 6th grade, and the teacher was a new teacher. I think he was either in his 1st or 2nd year when we had him. it was basically a one-room schoolhouse. So the building, you walked up the steps and into the building, and there was one floor, and that was like a band hall, so it was one open space. So that was the classroom, and then downstairs were bathrooms, and I can remember that basement always flooded. And what they did is they put boards down. So when you went down there, there's water everywhere. It would never fly today. It would never work.
So it would just have fits.
So you walked on boards to use the bathroom so you wouldn't get your feet wet.
Okay.
But that was such a great experience because we were away from the school. The teacher, Bruce Long was his name. He used to play football with us. He was always actively involved in recess. He had a terrible temper. He hated to lose. And we would play tackle football back then, the sixth graders, and he would always be the quarterback. Well, one time he was quarterback, and we would tackle him as well, or at least go after him.
Oh, I can't picture this in today's world.
It would not be in today's world. And the interesting part of it, he was out of bounds, and the guy that was trying to get him down didn't hear him, and this teacher turned bright red and was furious, and he turned around and whipped the ball pretty much as hard as he could at this kid. I think he missed him, and the kid, I still remember today, I was so shocked. He said, "You're a big baby," is what this 11, 12-year-old said to this teacher, and I just couldn't believe he said that. But it was true. It was. He was a bully, and I mean, in that part of us, I mean, it had lots of wonderful qualities, but that was not one of them. And the kid stood up to him, and that changed how he interacted with us.
So what were the girls doing while you all were playing football?
I'm not sure. But they did other stuff. I wasn't tuned in. I was not really aware of what the girls were doing at that point. There was another story where he got mad and someone was talking. In the back of the room was in the spring, and that room got really, really warm. So we had the doors open, and he whipped a piece of chalk at this kid, missed him, went across the street, and hit the mailman.
Oh, my.
And again, that was a different era, you know. It's like that.
Did parents get involved with
Well,
this?
what happened, my mom was a teacher, and this guy was a new teacher and didn't know this curriculum as well as he could. So my mom wrote his lesson plans for him. She was an English teacher, and he wasn't strong with English. He was stronger with math. And so my mom wrote all the English lesson plans for him and gave it to him. And so he was struggling. He's a new teacher.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't want to depict him as a monster because he wasn't. I mean, there was just a
There's
different
some
era.
fondness in your...
Well, that's when I decided I wanted to be a teacher. The thing that he did was he played with us at recess. And that's something I picked up on, and all through my career, that's exactly what I did. I played at recess with the kids. When I was at LaTorte, the kids didn't know how to play because they didn't ever had the experience to play and nobody to supervise. So it was a free-for-all at recess. So I would play, and I'd be the quarterback, just like Mr. Long was. I didn't get mad like he did, and then I would teach them how to play, and there would be incidents where kids would get mad and go after kids, and we'd talk through it, and they learned how to talk their problems out rather than, fight their way out of things. And then with the Crestview, and I was the kickball roller and the football quarterback, and I'd come in from recess soaked with sweat. I mean, it was just, I liked that. That was part of my day. That was a stress reliever for me. And I didn't do that as much at Bel Air, and I was a little older then, but I did go out to recess there as well. But I learned that when I was in school, so that was a Mount Holly legacy.
Oh, it's a special story.
It is.
So do you remember how you learned, how they taught you? Did you do a lot of things by rote? Did you...
We had a lot of memorization. A lot of memorization. Kids who did well in school had good memories. So back then, kids with special needs typically weren't in a regular classroom. They had special programs in special schools. It was before all of the inclusion effort and before all that stuff happened. So we had a range of abilities in our class, but it was not like it is today.
So you no longer live in Mount Holly Springs. You
No.
live in Dillsburg, I
Live
believe?
in Dillsburg, yeah.
But are you still involved with Mount Holly Springs? Do you still
I
still
do,
visit?
yeah. I was just there today with the Read and Feed program that Project Share and the library, Cumberland County Library Association put together. The volunteers come in to read, and then their lunch is provided. So I was at the church that was my home church I grew up in. It's a new denomination now, but the kids are from the Mount Holly area. I also volunteered some at the Mount Holly School this past year to do some work with parents on helping their kids with reading. So yeah, I'm still engaged with Mount Holly.
So how have you seen the community change since your childhood?
Well, it's probably more of a transient place now. I mean, there are a lot of folks that when I was growing up, the same kids. So when you lived in Mount Holly, that was a long-term deal. I don't think it's that much anymore, possibly. And it's a different era, different population, much more mobile and not as much of people being outside and that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a different time. It was a special time.
Do you have memories of the Amelia Gibbons Library?
Oh yeah. The library was a big drawing card. There wasn't much to do in Mount Holly that was structured, so yeah, we'd go hang out at the library. Got kicked out a few times because I wasn't there to do library stuff. I was there to socialize. And it's interesting, how the programs at that library have changed. I mean, tonight or this weekend, there's a Iron Chef
I saw that.
thing where kids are cooking, and there's the competition. Well, back then when I was there was the traditional library. You go, you can't talk, you get a book, and you get out. But we like to hang out there, and we were asked to leave a few times.
Did you hang out other places in town?
Basketball court. Right now it's a sewer plant. Back then it was a basketball court before they expanded. And we'd play basketball there. Go to the baseball field and we'd play baseball. Here's a good story. It was pretty stupid actually, but the creek is right there, so we would play basketball. You get thirsty, we'd go to the creek and get drinks. We were smart enough to realize that you needed to go upstream from the sewer plant, so they give us credit there. But pretty naive about what could have happened with drinking that water. But
obviously it didn't stunt your growth.
Well, it did not. I'm 6'7" now, so it had to be the reason why.
Right. Some nutrients in that water.
That's right. Yep.
What other memories would you like to share with people?
Well, it just I would just ride my bike and visit. I would I connected with parents and grandparents of kids that I knew, and just go ride and see who was around and stop and talk, or we get involved in a game. Or
did you call one of the things I'm always interested in is cultural things about children and adults. Did you call the parents of the friends by their first names, last name? How did you?
I think
how did you relate to the adults around you?
It's probably first names for the most part, or it might have been Mr. and Mrs. That depends on who it was. I don't really recall which way it was, but probably both.
Did you feel like the adults were involved in your life? Did you know
they
the
were
adults?
important to me. I mean, I like to touch base and see what was going on, and I think I always spent time to find out what was going on with them, and it wasn't, I was more not so into me as far as everything's about me. I was asking and checking in on them, and my dad had a big garden then, and that was across the street. An older fellow lived there. He at one point that whole area on Hill Street was orchard and turkey farm, and he lived there when it was that way. So he had at that point he still had orchard, and my dad had a garden there, and my dad took care of all that. So we'd go over and talk with him, and he was an older guy, and he enjoyed the company. We'd have coffee, and he liked roasted chestnuts, and it was nice. And my dad spent hours and hours over there, growing corn and beans and beets, and then we'd can all that stuff for freezing.
I was going to ask you about canning.
Yeah, we did.
Your mother can?
My mom was a big canner. We used that garden to fill freezers, and so we.
Did you during the winter?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Still remember sitting on the porch doing the lima beans and the green beans and shucking corn. We would do 20 dozen ears of corn at a time with blanch them and cut them off and put them in the freezer. And then she also canned with the canner. So yeah, we did all that stuff. So
it's interesting. It sounds very similar to my childhood in Missouri.
Oh, nice.
Very
nice.
similar.
Yeah. In fact, my mom was a big baker. She was a good cook, and she's been gone for a while now. But I've taken on the family role of I bake pies and I cook, and a lot of the stuff is because that's what she used to do. And I not that I did it with her. My son did a lot of cooking with her, and they both enjoyed it. But I take on that role now with. In fact, one of my brother's Christmas gift was I agreed to make him a pie a month. He loves sour cherry pie, so we picked sour cherries this season and froze enough to get me through the year to give him one pie a month.
Now, I don't know about the the nationality of the name Burgess. Is it Pennsylvania Dutch? Did you?
No, Burgess is well, again, the Burgess I'm from are from Western Pennsylvania, so there's some Scotch Irish. A lot of our relatives were from the South. They were part of the Confederacy. Pretty wild folk. Migrated to West Virginia. My grandfather on my dad's side, they worked in steel mills. So that's the background there. So probably Scotch Irish, maybe
Very Western Pennsylvania.
Yeah, who knows, a mix. My mother was a mill, so that was English, and so we were definitely European heritage.
Very similar to a lot of people in
Oh
this
yeah,
area.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
One of the things I'm really interested in is that everybody is a witness to historic events, and the classic one of people our age. Where were you on November 22nd, 1963?
Sure.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your memories of that time?
Well, a lot of it would happen in the 60s we were pretty oblivious to because we weren't in the mix of being worldly at that point. There was not the information age as it is today, but I do remember that day. Actually, I don't remember that day. I remember the funeral because it was, constant press coverage. And I think he was killed on a Friday, so that Saturday there were no cartoons.
Right.
I remember I missed my cartoons and didn't understand why there were no cartoons. So I remember that day. And then later, when I was older, in '68, I remember the day Bobby Kennedy was shot. In fact, my mother woke us up and said that he had been shot. They didn't like the Kennedys, my parents. But I can still remember her saying, nobody deserves to die for who they are. And that was a sad day. And then Martin Luther King, I remember that assassination as well. And then probably in the early, probably 70, somewhere around there, there was an older friend, an older brother of a friend that was part of an anti-war protest in Washington. And he came home and they lived right across from the school. And I'm not sure what brought us together, but he was talking about what he saw at that protest. And everybody was just, spellbound and mesmerized about what was going on. And that, of course, right in the middle of the Vietnam thing. And that's the first that I can remember even knowing anything about the upheaval that was going on back then. My brother graduated from high school in '73, so he had to register for the draft. So we were a little concerned about where that was going. And of course, the war ended, so he dodged that. And I'm pretty sure I didn't have to register for the draft in '76. So.
No, you would not have.
Yeah, so anyway, the '60s were so explosive in this country, but you're so insulated when you're growing up in a small town and into your own thing. But those were incidents that I do remember.
Well, I had really enjoyed talking to you. I thought I knew you, but I realized I didn't know some of these things about you. It's been really fun.
It's always fun, great to share things about Mount Holly. It defines who I am, and I'm very proud to be from Mount Holly, and that's I had an opportunity. I was lucky to grow up there.
Thank you.
Yeah.